Okay, so you want to own a pest control company, a fleet of white trucks with your logo on the door, a territory nobody else can touch, a phone that rings every time someone sees a cockroach in their kitchen. It looks like the cleanest business model in America. People do not stop having bugs, no matter what the economy is doing. Recessions come and go, but termites keep eating houses on schedule. You picture a route sheet, a spray tank, and a check that clears every single month. You have probably seen the pitch: low overhead, recession-resistant demand, and a recurring contract that renews itself year after year without you lifting a finger. Some franchise brochures will tell you this is one of the most durable service businesses in the country, and honestly, they are not entirely wrong. But durable is not the same thing as easy, and recurring revenue is not the same thing as guaranteed profit. Sounds simple. It is not simple, because underneath that spray tank sits a business built on chemistry, liability, and a promise you may not be able to keep. Here is what nobody tells you before you sign the franchise agreement. Let us start with what it actually costs to get in the truck. If you go fully independent, licensing alone can run you between $200 and $800 in most states. That number sounds small, and that is the trick. You still need a commercial pesticide applicator license, which usually means 2 to 4 weeks of exam prep and ongoing continuing education for the rest of your career. Add liability insurance, which runs $1,200 to $3,000 a year, because you are now legally responsible for chemicals you spray inside someone's home. Add a used service vehicle, which runs $15,000 to $25,000, plus professional-grade sprayer equipment in the $3,000 to $7,500 range. Total it up, and a lean independent operator can technically open the doors for somewhere between $15,000 and $50,000. But most owners do not go independent. Most owners buy a name. And that is where the real capital expenditure begins. A pest control franchise fee alone typically runs between $20,000 and $45,000, averaging around $35,000. Layer on vehicles, equipment, signage, and working capital, and total launch costs for a real franchise territory land somewhere between $75,000 and $300,000, sometimes more. Look at the actual brands. Truly Nolan wants $50,000 to $122,000 to start, plus a 7% royalty for the life of the agreement. Pestmaster wants $112,000 to $153,000, plus 7 to 10% in royalties. Mosquito Squad wants $164,000 to $220,000 before you have treated a single yard. Critter Control's range runs as high as $240,000, depending on the territory. None of that includes rent for a dispatch office, none of it includes chemical inventory, and none of it includes the marketing spend you need just to get your phone to ring in the first place. This is the part that catches new owners off guard every single time. You are not really buying pest control equipment. You are buying a license to operate inside a chemical handling regulatory framework, and that framework is what the money is actually paying for. There is also the financing question, and it is worth asking out loud. Some franchisors, like ValuePest, will finance up to 80% of your initial franchise fee over 4 years, which lowers the wall you have to climb on day one but raises a different question entirely. Who is really carrying the debt service coverage risk here, you or the franchisor? When a franchisor finances your entry fee, they are betting that your future cash flow can service that debt on top of the royalty they are already collecting. If your route density comes in soft in year one, you are now stacking loan payments on top of royalty payments on top of payroll before a single dollar has hit your own pocket. That stacking is exactly how a business that looked affordable on the sales deck turns into a cash flow trap in its first real winter. And one more number worth sitting with. Averaged across every size of operator, from the smallest independent to the mid-sized franchise build-out, industry data puts the blended national average startup cost at just over $12,000. That number is technically true and almost completely misleading, because it is dragged down by thousands of one-truck operators working out of their own garage with minimal insurance and a single service van. The moment you want a real territory, a real fleet, and a real brand behind you, that $12,000 number stops applying to you entirely. Now you are open, and the clock never stops. Every single day, whether the phone rings or not, this business has fixed costs ticking against it. Your technicians need to be paid whether they finish 8 stops or 4. Your trucks burn fuel and need maintenance whether they are full of chemical inventory or half empty. Your insurance premium does not pause because business was slow in February. If you are operating under a franchise, your royalty fee comes out automatically, typically 5 to 8% of gross revenue, plus another 1 to 3% for a national marketing fund. Combine those two line items and franchise systems are quietly taking 6 to 10% of every dollar you bring in before you have paid a single employee. This is where the concept of operating leverage actually matters, because it cuts both ways. Once your fixed costs are covered, meaning the truck payment, the base payroll, and the insurance are already accounted for, every additional stop on the route becomes cheap to service and highly profitable. But the reverse is just as true. If your route density is thin, if your technicians are driving 40 minutes between stops instead of 10, your fixed cost per customer explodes and your margin evaporates before you even notice it happening. Route density, not chemical cost, is often the single biggest driver of whether a pest control operator makes money in a given month. And then there is churn, the expense that never shows up as a line item but bleeds you anyway. Industry data puts annual residential churn at 15 to 20% and commercial churn at 5 to 10%. That means if you have 300 residential customers, you can expect to lose somewhere between 45 and 60 of them every year for reasons that have nothing to do with service quality. People move, people cancel. People decide they do not see bugs anymore, so why keep paying? Replacing each one costs real money, with direct mail campaigns running $200 to $300 per new customer and digital marketing running $150 to $250 per conversion. You are not just running a service business, you are running a customer acquisition treadmill that never lets you stop walking. There is also a labor problem underneath the labor cost, and it is a licensing problem. In most states, the technician standing on a customer's lawn with a sprayer needs to hold, or be working under, an active commercial applicator certification. That means your payroll is not just wages, it is wages for a credentialed workforce, and credentialed workers are harder to replace on short notice than an average retail hire. Lose a licensed technician mid-season and you are not just down a body, you are down a route, a set of customer relationships, and possibly a piece of institutional knowledge about which properties need what treatment and when. Turnover in a business like this does not just cost you a new hire training budget. It costs you the density that made the route profitable in the first place. Then there is the chemical annual inventory itself, sitting on a shelf, quietly exposed to two different kinds of risk. The first is simple carrying cost, because product tied up in a warehouse is capital that is not earning anything. The second is regulatory. Active ingredients get pulled, reformulated, or restricted by state and federal regulators without much warning, and when that happens, your standard treatment protocol can become non-compliant overnight. You do not get to renegotiate your chemical supply chain the way a restaurant renegotiates a produce contract. You use what is currently approved at whatever price the market is charging, or you stop treating that pest entirely. So how does this business actually make money if the fixed costs are constant and the churn is brutal? Here is the mechanism nobody explains on the sales brochure. The one-time treatment call is not the product. The one-time treatment call is the popcorn. It is the low-margin thing that gets a customer in the door and a technician on the property. The actual business is the recurring contract sitting behind it. A residential monthly service plan runs $35 to $75 a month. A commercial account runs $100 to $500 a month. Individually, those numbers look small. But multiply a locked-in recurring contract across a route with real density, and you start to understand why the biggest player in the industry looks the way it does. Rollins, the parent company of Orkin, generated $3.4 billion in revenue in 2024, with an operating margin of 18.1% and an adjusted EBITDA margin of 21.8%, serving more than 2.8 million customers. That is not a company selling spray treatments. That is a company selling recurring subscriptions with a bug spray delivery mechanism attached to them. The real profit engine goes even further than the monthly plan. It lives inside the termite bond, the so-called lifetime guarantee that a customer pays an annual renewal fee to keep active. That renewal fee is close to pure margin, because in a normal year, the company does nothing but reinspect a property that was already treated years earlier. The upsells work the same way. Mosquito control, rodent exclusion, wildlife removal, all bolted onto an existing customer relationship where the acquisition cost has already been paid off. Why would an owner chase one-time jobs when a signed annual contract is sitting right there, quietly renewing itself? The treatment sells the fear. The contract collects the money. Look at how the biggest operators actually price this out. Mosquito Shield built its entire franchise pitch around a customer retention rate above 90%, because a mosquito treatment plan is seasonal, recurring, and sold as a subscription from the very first visit. That retention number is not a marketing detail. It is the entire valuation thesis for the franchise. A pest control territory with a 90% retention rate is worth dramatically more than one with a 70% retention rate, even if both territories generate identical revenue in year one, because the buyer of that business 2 or 3 years from now is paying for the predictability of the customer base, not the trucks. This is why franchise systems push so hard on bundling. Get a customer onto general pest control, then cross-sell mosquito service, then cross-sell rodent exclusion, then cross-sell a termite bond. Each additional service line does not just add revenue, it raises the switching cost for that customer to ever leave, which is the entire point. Here is the trapdoor under the floor, and it is built directly into the thing that makes this business profitable. That termite bond, the lifetime guarantee that generates such clean recurring revenue, is also a promise. And a promise is a liability sitting on your balance sheet, whether you have accounted for it or not. Think about what you are actually selling when you sell a lifetime termite guarantee. You are telling a homeowner that if termites ever come back, you will retreat the property and, in many contracts, cover repair costs for as long as they keep paying the renewal fee. That is a bet you are placing today against pest pressure you cannot control years or even decades into the future. Termite activity swings with weather, with soil moisture, with regional swarm seasons that no operator sets and no operator can predict with precision. You cannot control the weather, you cannot control how many termites a bad spring produces, and you cannot control how many of your outstanding lifetime bonds get triggered in a single season. When the claims pile up faster than the renewal fees can cover them, the same contract that built your recurring revenue engine turns into the thing that drains it. Layer a second trapdoor underneath the first one. Every guarantee you sell today sits on your books as a future obligation, but almost nobody in this industry underwrites it the way an insurer would underwrite a policy. There is no actuarial table telling you exactly how many of your outstanding termite bonds will get triggered in a bad swarm year. You are pricing that renewal fee based on historical averages, and historical averages are exactly the thing that breaks down when weather patterns shift. When a warm winter lets termite colonies stay active longer than usual, or when a wet spring in a region that used to be dry suddenly creates the moisture. Rich soil conditions termites need to swarm. You cannot reprice a lifetime guarantee mid-contract without triggering the exact kind of customer backlash and regulatory scrutiny that has already taken down one major player in this industry. So the promise stays fixed, while the risk underneath it keeps moving. You do not have to guess how this plays out, because one of the largest names in the entire industry already lived it. Terminix built its reputation on exactly this model, the Lifetime Termite Protection Plan, sold as the ultimate peace of mind subscription. For years it worked exactly as designed, generating steady annual renewal income across hundreds of thousands of properties. Then the state of Alabama opened an investigation. What it found was a company that had been collecting annual termite protection premiums while failing to deliver the inspections and treatments those contracts actually promised. When customers suffered real termite damage, the company allegedly passed the cost back onto them, in some cases through renewal rate increases of up to 1,000%, seemingly designed to push customers into canceling rather than filing a claim. In November of 2020, Terminix agreed to a $60 million settlement with the state of Alabama. $25 million went into a consumer relief fund. $10 million was earmarked to retreat more than 12,000 customer homes, regardless of whether damage had actually occurred. The company also agreed to reinstate canceled lifetime contracts at their original reasonable pricing. That was not the end of it. In 2021, the state of Mississippi filed its own litigation over the same termite inspection and treatment practices, and litigation kept surfacing well beyond that. In one arbitration, the Archdiocese of Mobile was awarded $25.8 million after an arbitration panel found that termite activity had been allowed to continue and worsen across multiple properties for years, despite active service agreements. The panel called it a pattern of repeated failures, not a single missed inspection. This is the case study that every owner in this industry should study closely, because the mechanism is not unique to one company. The lifetime guarantee is the profit engine. It is also the loaded liability. Terminix did not fail because pest control stopped being profitable. It failed in these markets because the gap between what the guarantee promised and what the company actually delivered eventually became too large to hide, and regulators, then courts, closed that gap for them. Notice what actually broke the model. It was not a bad quarter of sales. It was not a competitor undercutting prices. It was the slow, quiet accumulation of a gap between promised service and delivered service. A gap that is invisible on a spreadsheet right up until a regulator or a plaintiff's attorney decides to measure it. Every operator selling a lifetime guarantee is carrying some version of that same gap on their books today, whether they can see it or not. The only real question is how big it is allowed to get before somebody with subpoena power decides to find out. So let us run the actual numbers, the optimistic scenario against the realistic bad year. In the optimistic scenario, you have built a franchise territory with real route density. Industry benchmarks put a mature franchise unit's average annual revenue somewhere between $400,000 and $2 million, with an EBITDA margin averaging 18%, ranging from 14 to 24% in strong operations. On an average initial investment of $160,000 that translates to a payback period of roughly 2.5 years, and a single unit owner's income landing around $120,000 a year. Break even for a fresh independent operator typically arrives once you cross 75 to 100 regular customers, usually achievable within 6 to 9 months if your marketing spend is disciplined and your churn stays under control. Now, the realistic bad year. Churn runs at the high end of the range, 20% instead of 15%. Customer acquisition costs creep upward because your competitors are bidding up the same digital keywords you are. Fuel and chemical input costs rise, which they will because both are tied to commodity markets you do not control. A weak termite season means fewer new bond sales to offset the renewals you are servicing for free. Under those conditions, that same EBITDA margin can compress from the 18 to 24% range down into single digits, and your payback period stretches out toward 4.5 years instead of 2.5. The difference between those two outcomes on a single mid-sized territory is not a rounding error. It is the difference between owning a cash-generating asset and owning a truck payment with a logo on the door. Now scale that same logic down to the small independent operator, the one running a single truck without a franchise brand behind it. In the optimistic scenario, that operator hits the 75 to 100 customer threshold within 9 months, at an average of $50 a month per residential account, which produces somewhere between $45,000 and $60,000 a year in gross recurring revenue before a single commercial account is added. Layer in even a handful of commercial contracts at $200 to $300 a month, and that same solo operator can be clearing 6 figures in gross revenue inside 18 months, on a startup cost that might have been as low as $20,000. In the realistic bad year for that same solo operator, a competitor undercuts pricing in the same zip code, customer acquisition cost per conversion climbs past $250, and churn eats into the base faster than new signups can replace it. Now the operator is spending real marketing dollars just to stay flat, with no franchise marketing fund to lean on and no brand recognition to fall back on. That is the structural disadvantage baked into going independent. You keep every dollar of profit, and you also absorb every dollar of downside, alone, with no national call center and no co-op advertising fund standing behind you when the phone stops ringing. So what are you actually buying when you buy a pest control company? You are not buying a spray tank, and you are not buying a truck full of chemicals. You are buying a machine that turns fear into a subscription, and turns a signed guarantee into a promise you have to keep for years after the check has already cleared. When the promise and the pest pressure stay in balance, that machine prints recurring revenue quietly, year after year, the way Rollins has done at a national scale, turning 2.8 million individual fears of insects into a company worth billions of dollars on a public stock exchange. When they fall out of balance, when the claims arrive faster than the renewals can cover them, the same guarantee that built the business becomes the bill nobody budgeted for. The bugs were never the real product. The bond was. And a bond, unlike a bug, does not die when you spray it. It sits there, quietly on the books, waiting to see whether next season's weather, next season's regulator, or next season's lawsuit is the one that finally comes looking for payment. Own that machine well, keep the promise smaller than the premium, and it will run for decades. Let the promise outgrow the premium, even once, and you will find out exactly how fast a recurring revenue business can turn into a recurring liability instead.